Welcome to Summary of the Week, your quick guide to the top headlines. Today is Saturday, September 20th. Here's a recap of some of the major events this week. On Friday, Prince Harry visited Kyiv with his Invictus Games Foundation to unveil new initiatives for supporting the rehabilitation of Ukraine's war wounded. He said he hoped to humanize the people involved in the war and what they are going through. UK Foreign Secretary Yvette Cooper also visited Kyiv on Friday in her first overseas visit since taking office, announcing a $192 million winter aid package to support Ukraine's energy infrastructure and frontline communities. At the UN Security Council on Friday, Poland condemned the large-scale and unprecedented incursion of Russian military drones into its sovereign airspace on September 9th to 10th. Poland called it a deliberate and premeditated act of aggression, as its Western allies rallied behind it, while Russia dismissed the incident as political clickbait. On Saturday, President Zelensky met with advisors to the leaders of the UK, Germany, France, and Italy to discuss Ukraine's readiness to share its military experience and contribute to NATO's collective defense. The Office of the President also reaffirmed Zelensky's willingness to meet with the Russian side at the leadership level. On Sunday morning, Ukrainian Special Operations Forces and Unmanned Systems Forces struck the Kirishi oil refinery, one of Russia's largest oil processing facilities in Leningrad Oblast. The refinery has an oil processing capacity of about 20 million tons per year. On the same day, Ukraine's main intelligence directorate and Special Operations Forces successfully carried out a series of operations to disrupt two separate railway routes in an effort to compound logistics problems for the Kremlin. Later on Sunday, US President Donald Trump reiterated that tougher sanctions on Russia by the US would be contingent on Europe halting oil purchases from Moscow. Trump said, "They're not doing the job. We can't be expected to be the only ones that are full bore," in the latest iteration of his long-running criticism of NATO allies for what he says is a failure to contribute sufficiently to shared security. Weighing in on the possibility of a direct meeting between Zelensky and Putin, he said that the hatred between the warring leaders is, quote, unfathomable, but labelled Russia the aggressor in a somewhat rare attribution of blame to Moscow. On Monday, Ukraine's military intelligence said its cyber specialists had launched a sweeping attack on September 14th, paralysing Russia's digital election systems during nationwide voting, including elections being staged in occupied Ukrainian territories. The operation disrupted voting platforms, telecom networks, and government services, including in occupied Crimea. A source told Kyiv Post that the operation was part of a broader effort to resist Russia's attempts to legitimize control over Ukrainian land. Kyiv had previously declared the elections on occupied Ukrainian territory illegal and their results null and void. Also on Monday, US military officers made a surprise visit to observe joint war games between Russia and Belarus in a sign of warming ties between Washington and Minsk. The pair have held a series of bilateral talks in recent months, culminating in the release of a number of prominent political prisoners by long-standing dictator Alexander Lukashenko. American servicemen were joined by military diplomatic missions from more than 22 other countries, including Azerbaijan, Hungary, China, Iran, Kazakhstan, Turkey, and Vietnam. Later in the week, Russian President Vladimir Putin also made a surprise trip to the joint military drills, as the Kremlin shrugged off NATO's alarm at the war games as, quote, emotional overload. On Monday evening, Ukraine's 11th Army Corps accused Moscow's troops of disguising themselves as civilians during a recent sabotage mission in the Donetsk region, using local residents as human shields. They said that Russian troops had hidden in buildings in a Kyiv-controlled settlement approximately 11 kilometers from the Ukrainian stronghold of Liman, while dressed as civilians, condemning the tactic as, quote, a gross violation of international humanitarian law. On Tuesday morning, a Russian drone was recorded slamming into an educational building in Kharkiv, erupting in a plume of smoke and scattering debris across nearby streets. Russia also bombarded the Zaporizhia, Kherson, and Kyiv regions, in what President Zelensky said was, quote, just a typical day for Russia. which routinely hits sites with, quote, no military purpose whatsoever. On the same day, Commander of the Unmanned Systems Forces Robert Brovdy said that the armed forces of Ukraine had shot down a Russian Orion reconnaissance and strike drone worth $5 million, a moment captured in a striking video clip. Also on Tuesday, US President Donald Trump arrived in Britain for days of pomp and pageantry as he was fated with an unprecedented second state visit. He was hosted by King Charles for a lavish state dinner and treated to a flypast by both UK and US jets, in what officials have called the largest military show for a state visit in living memory. On Wednesday, it was announced that Britain would open a £400 million or $550 million drone factory in Swindon, bringing production of the Takeva AR-5 long-range drone to the country for the first time, and expanding work on the RAF's AR-3 drones. The project is closely linked to support for Ukraine and will start production next year. On the same day, Ukraine's parliament ratified a 100-year partnership agreement with the United Kingdom, covering security, defense, the economy, science, technology, and culture. Also on Wednesday, in a statement on Telegram, Yulia Navalny said that 2 laboratories in different countries have confirmed that her husband, late opposition leader Alexei Navalny, who died in prison in February last year, was poisoned while in custody. She accused international actors of avoiding publication of the findings due to political considerations. At a joint press conference with the UK's Sir Keir Starmer on Thursday at the Prime Minister's country retreat, Chequers, US President Donald Trump lamented that Russian President Vladimir Putin had, quote, really let me down. In turn, Starmer praised Trump's role in increasing pressure on Putin and said that the UK is, quote, prepared to take the lead in efforts to guarantee a peace deal. Also at Chequers on Thursday, US First Lady Melania Trump was given a silk scarf designed by Ukrainian children in recognition of her advocacy on behalf of Ukrainians' young people who have faced abduction, Russification, militarization, and indoctrination by Moscow. Also on Thursday, the Trump administration gave the green light to a substantial military sale to Poland, approving a deal for Javelin missile systems worth an estimated $780 million. The decision came as Poland faces renewed airspace incursions from Russian drones, creating a tense security situation on NATO's eastern flank. According to a notification delivered to Congress by the Defense Security Cooperation Agency, the deal includes 2,506 FGM-148F Javelin missiles and 253 command launch units. The Polish Internal Affairs Minister confirmed on Thursday that the country's border guards had recorded an increase in drone activity from Russia and Belarus. These latest attempts to breach Polish airspace came just over a week after a more serious incident on September 10th, when more than 20 Russian drones entered Polish territory, prompting an unprecedented response from NATO jets. Thanks for watching this week's Summary of the Week. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll see you back here next Saturday.